Hello friends, welcome to Hybridacademy and to the 5th session of Learn Photography. In this course, we will learn how to capture pictures perfectly, and in the 5th session, we will learn about how much light is enough for taking a photograph. Here's a small brief on Hybridacademy imparting professional education. We have a thought to change billions of lives by providing professional education accessibly and affordably, to reskill and upskill the professional level of knowledge, to make continuous learning a part of life, and to make personalized education accessible. We focus on interactive education because it is engaging and better for learning. So please like, share and subscribe our channel so that every time you are notified whenever some new content is posted. We are eagerly looking forward to your support. So if we see in detail, in the 5th session, we will learn how to manage correct amount of light with the help of light meter. We will learn about the positive and negative stops of light. We will learn about the light metering issues and will resolve exposure issues with exposure compensation. After this, in the end, we will summarize everything we have learned and will know what we will learn in the next session. In case if you have any queries or questions, please feel free to ask the same in the comment box. Now, let's quickly start with our session, Why is light meter important? For photography, we use a photographic auxiliary device called lightmeter. It is used to measure the amount of light falling on the subject and to determine the proper exposure for a photograph. Based on the reading received from the light meter, we set the correct exposure before taking the shot. Too much of light for taking a photograph will burn the picture. Most of the sections of the digital image will be visible in white, and the main subject will be somewhat lost in those white sections. In photography, we call this as image burn or overexposed. Too less light will underexpose the picture, and most of the section of the picture will either be black or very dark. In photography, we refer to images that are darker than the actual scene as underexposed, while those that are brighter are considered overexposed. Sometimes we will underexpose or overexpose an image for artistic purposes. If we set the correct exposure or correct amount of light, the picture will be neither underexposed nor overexposed and will be treated as a perfect shot in terms of light and exposure. Now, when we know what is underexposed and overexposed, to measure how much the photo is underexposed or overexposed, we need to know about light meter. Let's see what is light meter and how it works. Usually, an inbuilt light meter is found inside DSLR cameras, which measures the light reflecting off the subject and then calculates an appropriate shutter speed and aperture size for the correct exposure. This is also known as TTL, through the lens metering. In most of the DSLRs, this looks like a scale with reading from -2 to +2. The light metering scale ranging from -2 to +2 helps us to identify if the picture is going to be underexposed or overexposed. As we have learned so far about the aperture and shutter speed, that they both control the amount of light falling on the sensor. The bigger the aperture and lesser the shutter speed, more amount of light enters the camera to fall on the sensor. Whereas the smaller the aperture and faster the shutter speed, less amount of light falls on the camera sensor. In this scale, we have a marker like we have a small black bar below 0 on the left side of the screen. This marker indicates if the current setting of aperture, shutter speed and ISO combine to create properly exposed photo. Here we have already learned about the aperture and shutter speed, and we will learn about ISO settings in the next lesson. If the settings are not set for a properly exposed photo, that marker slides towards one side or the other side of the zero, indicating that the light is either too less or too much for the photo to be shot. The farther the bar moves from the center point, the more the setting needs to be altered to achieve the accurate exposure. To further explain this, if the bar moves towards the minus, it is indicating that there isn't enough light and the photo will probably be too dark. This is considered to be underexposed. And if the bar moves towards the plus, it is indicating that there is too much light and the photo will probably be too bright. This is considered to be overexposed. Now let's understand how the light meter works. Similar to the human eye, the camera sensor reads and calculates the amount of light reaching it and after getting reflected from the object or the subject in focus. This calculation is purely based on the current aperture, shutter speed and ISO settings. Once this amount of light is calculated, it shows the same via light meter to help us know the correct situation in the form of stops on the light meter. Camera considers an average of 18% reflection of light as the correct exposure. Though white objects reflect 100% of light and black objects reflect 0% of light, middle gray is the middle shade between white and black. Middle gray is also referred as 18% gray, considering the fact that the middle gray reflects only 18% of light. Camera assumes that if a subject is reflecting 18% of light, it is under the correct exposure. Every single increment or decrement on the light meter is considered to be one stop. It indicates exactly how many stops we are away from a balanced exposure. With this knowledge, we can quickly make accurate adjustments to our camera settings to find the balanced exposure. One stop increment means we are doubling the amount of light reaching the camera sensor. In other words, once we double the amount of light reaching the camera sensor, we are increasing the stop by 1 on light meter. This slide again explains the same thing where +1 means double, +2 means 4 times and +3 means 8 times more amount of light is reaching the sensor in comparison to the required amount of light for balanced exposure. On the contrary, each stop decrement means we are reducing the amount of light reaching the camera sensor by half. In other words, once we halve the amount of light reaching the camera sensor, we are decreasing the stop by 1 on light meter. This slide again explains the same thing where -1 means half, -2 means 4 times less and -3 means 8 times less amount of light is reaching the sensor in comparison to the required amount of light for balanced exposure. Here we can see the comparison of photos taken with correct and balanced exposure, overexposed and underexposed picture. Like everything has a few positive points and a few negative points, light meter also has an issue. Let's see what's that. Camera meter measures exposure by first turning the subject colors into grey tones and then sets the exposure comparing the subject colors with middle grey, that is 18% grey. In this case, if the subject is too dark or black, light meter considers the reflecting light in comparison to 18% grey and assumes that the shot is underexposed. Whereas if the subject is too bright or white, lightmeter considers the reflecting light in comparison to 18% gray and assumes that the shot is overexposed. In such cases, the exposure needs to be manually set by changing the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO settings to achieve the desired output, which looks similar to the actual object. By manually making the settings, the dark tone and the light tone subjects can be shot. To resolve such situations of light meter issue, we have an option of exposure compensation. Let's now know how can we do this. Exposure compensation basically helps us to override automatic exposure adjustments the camera makes in situations with uneven light distribution, filters, non-standard processing, underexposure or overexposure. It enables us to take control of the image's brightness by manually increasing or decreasing exposure. In order to use exposure compensation, camera must be in one of the modes that utilizes the camera meter, such as aperture priority, shutter priority, program mode, or any other scene mode that performs automatic exposure adjustments. Exposure compensation will do absolutely nothing in manual mode. Most of the cameras have a dedicated button either on the top or the back of the camera with a plus and minus mark on it, dedicated for exposure compensation. To apply exposure compensation, press the dedicated button and rotate the dial for increasing or decreasing exposure, and the resulting update can be seen in the light meter. So for example, the photo seems to be overexposed. Press the exposure compensation button and rotate the dial to change the light meter from 0 to -1, and vice versa in case of underexposed results. Today in lesson 5, we have learned about how the light meter works, what are the stops of light, how light meter works for aperture and shutter speed modes, light metering issues, how to deal with light and dark tones, and exposure compensation. Going forward, we will learn a lot about photography. In the next session, we will learn about the fully manual mode using aperture and shutter together in manual mode along with ISO mode. We will also add a few new words to our photographic vocabulary in relation to fully manual mode, aperture, shutter, and ISO mode. Thank you for joining the complete session. Please share and subscribe our channel so that your friends also get benefited with the information, acquire free knowledge, and learn new things. We are eagerly looking forward to your support. Thanks, take care and stay safe. Hope to see you in the next session.